Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for being with us. I'm Anne Collins Goodyear, co-director of the Bowdoin College Museum of Art. It's wonderful to have you with us to celebrate the opening of Abigail DeVille in the Fullness of Time by participating in our inaugural program, A Conversation with the artist Abigail DeVille, and the exhibition's organizing curator, Eileen Jeng Lynch, director of Curatorial Programs at the Bronx Museum. Exploring closely the material features of human history, Abigail DeVille, in the Fullness of Time, explores the relationship of human beings to the spaces they occupy, their neighborhoods, their cities, their regions, their countries, and their cosmos. In this exhibition, DeVille sheds new light on the production of history itself, exploring the persistent imprint of selected fragments of the past upon the present in a fashion that both acknowledges the impact of traumatic events as well as the resilience of the human spirit. Our exhibition grows out of Abigail DeVille, Bronx Heavens, curated by Eileen Jeng Lynch, which represents the first museum survey of Abigail DeVille's work. We are thrilled that the show has had the opportunity for expansion with the addition of new works created by DeVille for Bowdoin College, and that it has been enriched by the opportunity to travel one of its most extraordinary pieces, the lunar capsule, to various towns around the state of Maine prior to its installation here for the exhibition. In addition to the tour of DeVille's lunar capsule to Houlton, Lewiston, and Portland this spring, there is another important dimension of the exhibition's prehistory, if you will. In the academic year 2022 to 2023, Bowdoin had the pleasure of hosting Abigail DeVille when she joined our community as the Hallie K. Harrisburg 90 and Michael Rosenfeld Artist in Residence. We are deeply appreciative to Hallie and Michael for underwriting this incredibly important and enriching program. As with every undertaking at the museum, the success of Abigail DeVille in the Fullness of Time owes a great deal to the extraordinary talent of the staff of the BCMA. Every member of our team has contributed in exceptional ways to this exciting show. We have also been incredibly fortunate, as always, to be assisted by a remarkable team of interns. I am particularly grateful to Axel Rommel and Zoe Pringle for their support. For underwriting costs connected with the exhibition, we express our appreciation of the Elizabeth B.G. Hanlon Fund, and for support of the catalog, which I hope you will all be able to enjoy at some point. We're grateful to the Community Foundation of Western North Carolina. As always, we are deeply appreciative of the extraordinary support that the Advisory Council of the Bowdoin College Museum of Art provides to us, and to Senior Vice President and Dean for Academic Affairs, Jennifer Scanlon, and President Safazaki, for their ongoing support of the museum's work. We wish to express our sincere appreciation to Eileen and the entire team at the Bronx Museum, including Executive Director Claudio Rodriguez, for an incredibly enjoyable partnership. And finally, we offer our deepest thanks to Abigail DeVille for her partnership, her enthusiasm, and her generosity in sharing her creative vision. This evening, I am delighted to have an opportunity to engage in conversation with both Eileen and Abigail. Eileen Jeng Lynch is the Bronx Museum's Director of Curatorial Programs. She stewards the museum's curatorial initiatives and exhibition schedule with an eye toward expanding its presence in the Bronx and beyond. Jane Lynch made her curatorial debut at the Bronx Museum with Abigail DeVille, Bronx Heavens, the museum, the artist's first museum survey, out of which grew the exhibition we celebrate today, Abigail DeVille in the Fullness of Time. Jane Lynch also recently curated Bronx Calling, the 6th AIM Biennial, an exhibition showcasing work by artists who completed the Bronx Museum's flagship AIM Fellowship, a career accelerator program designed to give promising artists the knowledge and skills to sustain a successful practice. As the founder of the creative incubator, New Meraki, Jane Lynch has also launched numerous national and global-based, community-based curatorial initiatives. Jane Lynch received her MA from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago and her BA from Syracuse University. Based in New York City, Abigail DeVille is an artist who uses history as a medium to envision a new future. Among DeVille's many honors are awards from the Joan Mitchell Foundation, the Edward and Sally Van Leer Fund of the New York Community Foundation, or the New York Community Trust, rather, and a Creative Capital Award. In 2015, she also received the Obie Award for design for her work as a scenic and costume designer on Prophetica and Oratorio from a production of La Mama Experimental Theater Club. In 2017, she was awarded a Rome Prize from the American Academy in Rome for a fellowship between 2017 and 2018. She has held residencies at the Studio Museum in Harlem and the International Studio and Curatorial Program in Brooklyn. DeVille received her BFA from the Fashion Institute of Technology and her MFA from Yale University. She has also studied at the Pratt Institute and the Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture here in Maine, where she returned as a faculty member in the summer of 2022. Also in 2022, DeVille received the Anonymous Was a Woman Award. And during the coming academic year, 2024 to 2025, DeVille will serve as a Hoder Fellow at Princeton University. Please join me in welcoming Eileen Jeng Lynch and Abigail DeVille. And following our conversation, we look forward to opening the floor to the audience to hearing your questions and reflections. Thanks so much for being with us, and please join me in welcoming Eileen and Abigail. We have been having an absolutely wonderful time at the Bowdoin College Museum of Art over the past several weeks, working with Abigail on the installation of Abigail DeVille in the Fullness of Time. But this is a collaboration, as I mentioned earlier, that grows out of the opportunity to meet Abigail when she was with us as an artist in residence, as well as to have the pleasure of spending time with Eileen's incredible exhibition at the Bronx Museum. And we have very much enjoyed the opportunity to watch the relaunching of this museum in a new space. And I thought it would be interesting to begin our conversation today with the perspective that greets the visitor as they walk into the museum here at Bowdoin, and to hear a little bit about how the exhibition has been conceptualized here, and a little bit about the way in which this project took shape as Abigail and Eileen began their work on the project that would become Bronx Heaven. I'm sharing with you a very intriguing piece, Have Maine, of 2022, which represents the ship that transported Henry Hudson up the Hudson River as he conducted work on behalf of the Dutch government. It's a work that in many ways, I think, announces important themes of the exhibition. Oh, it's not on. Okay, I asked and I thought people said it was. Okay. Thank you. Is that better? No. Oh, there we go. Thank you, Amy. But at any rate, as I was saying, Half Main, which is the artwork that greets people as they enter the exhibition, is an artwork that I think in many ways sets up much of what's happening with the exhibition. It is a representation of a ship sailed by Henry Hudson up the Hudson River as he was conducting initial explorations of the region that has become New York on behalf of the Dutch during the 17th century. It is an incredibly fascinating piece. And I thought perhaps Abigail and Eileen, we could begin our conversation here, perhaps learning a little bit more about this work, the ways in which it relates to other objects in the exhibition, and above all, with its important ties to New York, perhaps use it as a point of departure for hearing a little bit more about the exhibition that you conceptualized for the Bronx Museum, as well as the questions and interests that brought you together originally to pursue the collaboration that has now brought us together here at Bowdoin.
Great. Thank you, Anne. Thank you, Abigail, and thank you, everyone, for being here. I can start it off by saying Abigail's work really excavates the lesser-known or unknown histories of place, and Half Moon certainly does do that with American history. And everyone, okay, this is kind of working. With the flag being tied against the part of the mast of the ship. And Abigail, I'm wondering if you want to talk a little bit more about that before I dive into how the exhibition itself really originated.
So this piece is actually a chopped up version of something else. So the original piece was a ship that I made at Socrates Sculpture Park in 2016 that was called Half Moon. That was a quarter version of the original ship that sailed the river that now bears Henry Hudson's name, I think around 1604, 1609. And one of the things that I always loved about that story in particular was the skirmishes that he had with the Lenape almost immediately. Whatever. I mean, it was a little bit of a shady transactions happening from Jump Street. So I give a nod to the moment of kind of contact, a point of contact, and thinking about the undercurrents of Dutch history or development of New York City or New Amsterdam, and thinking about how that kind of permeates and what seeds were planted that are still flourishing into this particular moment. And so this is like a baby version of the scraps of whatever was left over from that ship. And so I end up doing that a lot in terms of cannibalizing something, one work into another. And so this, at the end of the day, could be almost like the heart of the ship.
I guess I wanted to bring up when, in thinking about the context of the Bronx Museum, and, I immediately thought of you and your work being like the perfect match in the sense that, you've participated in our AIM Fellowship program back in 2012, your Bronx base, and then you participated in the biennial back in 2013. So immediately, I thought that a survey or First Museum survey of your work would be so appropriate, and especially within the context of the Bronx. And I distinctly remember when I first when we first spoke on the phone about this, and we were talking about it, you already had new work as if it was already percolating and planned out. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about this. You knew the title. I mean, everything really fell into place. Yeah, if you want to elaborate a little bit more on that.
Yeah, she called me and she was like, I have good news. And I was like, oh, all right. And then I'm like, she's like, you want to, I was like, yes. And then I immediately knew what I wanted it to be about, which was also in part honoring my family and in part honoring I don't want to say dreams deferred, but, you know, the dream spaces that shape us and make us, right? The spaces that we occupy that can be spaces where generations kind of dwell and pour into one another and grow in unexpected ways, and the ways that we flourish and how we imprint ourselves on spaces, but then how spaces also psychologically and fundamentally imprint themselves on us. And I really wanted to honor my grandmother and thinking about my family and living in this one particular section of the Bronx and also public housing. Because I think originally when I had started thinking about the cosmos, I was living with my grandmother, and I affectionately call her the archivist of 49 West 225th Street. But they lived in this this project called Marble Hill. They moved there in the 1950s because my, I guess, step-great-grandfather was a vet from World War II, and they got first dibs on public housing. And so they pretty much lived there until they passed away. My great-grandmother died in the 1980s. She lived there for the rest of her life. And my grandmother died in 2011. She lived there for the rest of her life. And so that's where my dad was raised. There were moments of where I got raised there as a kid. I lived there during high school for a period, and then I chose to live with my grandmother by ourselves, like during parts of undergrad and after. And the way that she opened her home for unexpected materials and fragments that were the leftovers from other people's lives, like people would come and knock on the door before they were going to toss something out and ask her if she wanted it. So her house was just this cavern of material witnesses from other people's lives. And so it showed me in that moment, I was just like, okay, there's no hierarchy here in terms of material worth, that everything is just information. And so thinking about that and these compressed interiors of like these apartments, or like, you know, a tenement in New York or wherever, started making me think about this relationship to the infinite expanse of the universe.
And Abigail and Eileen, maybe I'll jump in for a moment to just make a transition to our next slide, because one of the things that we sought to do here at Bowdoin was to take advantage of the sequence of galleries that we have and to set up or to reinforce themes that are present in Abigail's work, including the theme of the Great Migration. And in a sense, we saw Henry Hudson in a way inaugurating that, but of course occupying a space in international and American history that is perhaps a little different from more recent migrants to the New York area, including members of Abigail's family. And of course, Abigail, this is a piece featuring your grandmother, and so I thought that this might be a nice way of amplifying some of the comments you've just been making.
So that's a portrait of my grandmother in the center. It was her favorite picture of herself. She was 16 years old, and like, I don't know what, it was like a theatrical looking photograph. So I don't know if it was a costume for a play, but she was somebody who was like the performer that never got to perform, really. She wanted to be a singer. She was very dramatic. And it's a print, like a frame print of Renoir's La Loge. That's why it's called La Loge Harlem. And she moved to Harlem with her grandmother, with her own mom in around 1942 or so. So I'm thinking about a lot of things in terms of the composition of this, but thinking about the history of Harlem. That's why it's like these theater goers, like it's set in Paris in the 1870s, but thinking about how Harlem was originally developed, or before it was developed in the late 19th century, early 20th century, it was a playground for the rich, right? Like there was lots of, there was horse racing and all kinds of stuff. It was like it was the countryside before it got built up. But that mirrored or combined with like ideas of like what constitutes a ghetto, or how does that function in American imagination? And then also different perspectives of gaze, of like who's actually really watching, and who's at play here, who's acting, who's the actor, who's in control.
And Abigail, you were speaking a moment ago about some of the fragments that occupied the floor, the home that your grandmother put together, where many members of your family were able to spend time. And so perhaps on that note, you'd like to say something about Bronx Floors.
So Bronx Floors is like my answer to Gordon Clark's Bronx Floor, which is in the Bronx Museum collection, which I wish we had dragged that out and put it next to it in the exhibition, but that's something else. And it's not diss to Gordon Clark. I like his work, but my great-grandmother, the apartment that my grandmother lived in was my great-grandmother's apartment originally, and they put down this flooring, I think, in 1970, and they were both really intense smokers. And then when my grandmother passed away, Social Security alerted housing, and so they gave me like a week to pack everything up and leave. And so I just tried to take as much material as possible. So I ripped up the whole floors because I knew I was going to do something with it later, and like took down some wood paneling, mirrors, like whatever I could take, I took that had their residue, right? So really that's that, right? Like Gordon Clark's making an intersection in our architecture that is devoid of people, and it's an intervention in form, and it has sociological implications. But for me, this is like when the thumbprint is on the thing. You know what I mean? Like it's a record of their existence.
Like each material has that history of them. And you have the gardening hoe as well. With the,
Project Hoe. So that's contraband from the community garden. My grandmother kept that hoe. It was orange originally. It's pretty dirty looking right now, but I think a lot of the paint has flaked off, and there's somewhere on it still you can faintly see the New York City Public Housing Authority logo on it.
Would you say that you had mentioned that your grandmother was known as archivist, that her accumulation of materials, of objects, directly influenced you in your practice?
It definitely did. It informed it in early, and I'm thankful for that time.
Abigail, yesterday morning, Eileen and I had an opportunity to walk through the exhibition together, and part of the pleasure of that was the opportunity to observe some adjustments that had happened in the installation of the work between its installation at the Bronx Museum and here in Brunswick. And one of the things, Eileen, that I think stood out to you was the arrangement of these heads. And maybe would you be willing to just say a word about what you observed? And then, Abigail, maybe we can ask you to speak a little bit about this transformation.
Sure. I just wanted to mention before that is that seeing this iteration of Abigail's exhibition in the Fullness of Time really, combined with the iteration of Bronx Heavens, feels full in that sense. Abigail's practice is very place-based, and so I think taking everything into consideration and having the spaces, a different configuration here at the Bowdoin College Museum of Art is just it's just wonderful to have that in dialogue. And so I couldn't help but notice that for Bronx Floors that there is the heads or some of the objects are now kind of floating, like they're almost like a constellation behind the theater flat, if you will. Can you talk a little bit more about that shift for this piece?
Yeah, I'll say that this piece never felt resolved to me. You know how, you're just working on something and this is like the third iteration of it. So this is finally, for me, when I think things are like, probably closer to being done. I haven't known what to do with the back of this for a while. I mean, I made this in 2022, and it was a 2-person show with Beverly Buchanan, and it was really in response to me looking through the windows of the shack constructions that she's made, which are really like wild abstractionist, like beautiful abstraction paintings inside the interiors. And so I felt like when I was like peering through those windows that I was looking at something that was also very familiar to me in terms of my own home. And this actually is, I think, partly inspired by you, and in conversation that we had in the last week or so where you kept bringing up Mina Loy and talking about Christ on a clothesline. And so then I literally just put a clothesline on the back of this. I kept hearing that in my head, and so that's also part of the reason why this ended up as like a clothesline formation and how the things that were attached onto the back of it. But it feels more like a vortex. And then, New York at Dawn, the figure is not looking at the back of these theater flats anymore, but is actually maybe looking into some other kind of cosmic realm.
And actually, Abigail, on that note, I can advance the slide and maybe just give you an opportunity to speak a little bit more to New York at Dawn, which is located directly adjacent to Bronx Floors. Here's how it appears in our space, but just to perhaps give a slightly clearer view of the artwork. This, of course, is how it was installed at the Bronx Museum. And one of the things that I do find so interesting about it, and so maybe I'll ask you about this, is the presence of mirrored fragments on the floor. And of course, that's something that we also notice in some other works of yours. And there's a beautiful way in which the glass is fractured in La Loge Harlem, which you alluded to earlier. But might you be able to share with us a little bit about what you have in mind with respect to the arrangements of these fragments, and especially fragments of reflective glass or mirrors?
I was thinking about this while I was making it because I think, a lot of times that you're attracted to the things that you were told not to touch, right? And so I grew up around a lot of broken glass, like in the street or whatever. My mother was like she acted like the house was on fire if there was some broken glass around. And I always was like, ooh, look at that. You know what I mean? Like I always thought broken glass was really beautiful. It's really beautiful. And I don't know if that's like some, this is urban aesthetic poetics or whatever, but it's refracted light, right? Like it's silver coated. You can see yourself, but you can see other things. And it's thinking about the fragmenting of everything all at once, continuously. And I think it's just a way to play also with light.
And then thinking about like the fragments of history and how you've noted that history is incomplete. And kind of turning it on its head, because if there's that superstition that if a mirror breaks, that it's bad luck. And I feel like you've flipped that in a sense. But I also can't help but think, it references back to the African American tradition of yard work, where in the South they had these gardens with adornments of reflective materials, of embellishments that are seeking to connect ancestral histories and the land, the spirit, and religion.
I think that is true, but there's ways in which we have inherited knowledge that we don't completely understand, like maybe aesthetic choices or moves that you make that nobody taught you to make that, or nobody told you to do that. You're listening to something else, and it feels instinctual, but it's just a different way of knowing. And I think that in lots of ways my work does speak to this tradition of yard work and thinking about the materials that have come from practices in the Congo, like material usage ways to speak to the spirit realm in the Congo. But I don't think I'm not these are histories that are outside of my realm of knowledge, and then I'm operating within them just because that somehow, some way has been a gift that was given or a seed that was planted that doesn't have an explanation attached to it. I think, and thinking about this, because I was talking to, I was being interviewed by 2 interns recently.
Thank you, Axel and Zoe.
And in the interview, I had cited, or I had talked about very briefly, Bell Hooks' essay, Touching the Earth. But anyway, if I find the thing that I wanted to say about it, but
Abigail, I'm glad that you're bringing up your interest in bell hooks, because one of the things that this wonderful interview that was recently conducted by Zoe Pringle and Axel Rommel made clear is that you are deeply interested in literature. And in fact, there is a literary reference that is embedded in this work that I thought might be nice to talk about, and that is the implicit reference to Lorca's Dawn, itself an urban poem done when the Spanish poet Federico Garcia Lorca was a student at Columbia. And so that has been very interesting to me in speaking with you over the past few weeks, to learn a little bit more about the degree to which literature is such an important inspiration for the work you're creating.
yeah, there's this line in the poem where he talks about these birds rising over the black putrid waters at sunrise in New York. And the poem was called Dawn, and my middle name is Dawn. And so in the moment in which I conceived of this, I was making a lot of paintings or a lot of works that had blackbirds in them, or pigeons, and thinking about forced migrations or gentrification specifically in that moment. But yeah, I seized on that. There was something about that line that it made me want to make something in response to it. And then, you know, the repeating image of the American flag, I was definitely, you know, like, there's like an undercurrent of answering to, you know, giants of, white male giants of the 20th century, but dude who made the flag painting. Yeah, Jasper Johns. I just spaced on his name real quick. Sorry, Jasper Johns. But you know, like making a version of my own flag painting and getting it sucked into the black hole. But in terms of the thing about language, or the thing about words, you know, like to cite Maya Angelou talking about that she believes that a word is a thing, right? That it gets trapped in the rug, and in the upholstery, in the chair, and then in your hair, and then finally, you know, in the crux of your elbow, and finally enters into your body, right? That words are actually things, and that she hangs her life on that. And thinking about the power of a word for the potential for creation. It does create, and the things that it creates, you know, are not necessarily definable all of the time. And so I feel like there's so much tremendous abstract potential within the turn of a phrase, right? That the options are almost limitless. And so I'll read something and maybe it'll like stick to me like glue, you know, or like, you know, at the bottom of your shoe and you can't get it off, kind of a thing. And so you just sit around and you think about it, and you sit with it for a little while and think, you know, okay, maybe I'm going to make something in response to this. And so that's the relationship to words, and that's the relationship specifically with this poem.
I love the idea. Oops, can I turn this off? I'm not sure if this mic is working right now. But I can, oh, good, perfect, thank you. I can also project pretty well. But Abigail, I love this notion of things sort of getting stuck, as it were, and the ways in which words, or perhaps we could say breath, embeds itself in things. And I thought perhaps we could conclude our discussion specifically of the Osher Gallery just with a quick comment about Untitled Cigarettes, which is a work I find to be incredibly poetic in terms of your description of how breath locks itself into the things in our midst, and often things that we may overlook. So, I forgot. Sorry.
Yeah, so it's a picture of my grandmother. It's the evidence of her existence, right? She breathed through each and every single one of those filters. And so I was, behind her back, I guess maybe obsessively collecting cigarette butts for a little bit. And I just kept them in a bag for a long time. I didn't know what I was going to do with them. And then finally I made something one day with them, and that's what happened.
And I feel like the cigarette butts combined with the staples are forming this constellation, this cosmic realm, maybe even a type of like spinning vortex, that we saw in New York at dawn as well. And so there's this notion of movement, of vortex, of things getting stuck and imprinted. And it kind of appears in some of the works that we're going to be talking more about. But can you talk a little bit about that notion of the vortex and the black hole?
I mean, I think it's hard to say for this what I was thinking about, because I'm not sure what I was thinking about in this moment, other than to make a gesture that could honor her. But now, and we know like 97% of our bodies are made up of stardust, and then thinking about this as like a stellar portrait of her through the remnants of her breath. I mean, outside of that, I don't know if I don't want to think of her as a black hole.
I guess I was referring more to the previous. Yeah.
We're looking at. I started using black holes maybe around 2010 and thinking about a way to have a large conversation without like a center point. Like what's the way that I could make something or shape an idea that has like endless, there's no end to it, right? There's no limitations to it. And it doesn't necessarily need to have like a structural form and a way to organize space and material information, and then to address like different topics of historical erasure. Because in 2010, black holes weren't invisible. They're not no more, so I can't say that anymore. But, that was the impetus for it. And I really like cosmology. Like, there are a lot of ideas that really make me hot and bothered, and I don't understand them really, and that makes me even more excited. You know what I'm saying? Like when you really don't understand something, or that you are just like on the periphery of understanding the abstraction within an idea, right? And so then how can I use this little nugget of what I do, what I can grasp, to make something larger or expansive, to have a more connectivity with the material and with the audience.
Thank you so much, Abigail. I'm going to just move rapidly, very quickly through a few other pieces in this gallery, just as a little teaser. I love this image of your mom's cubicle and the wordplay with whole and whole. But I want, Abigail, based on what you and Eileen were just saying about vortexes and black holes, to sort of enter into our Halford Gallery and to take and have an opportunity to look at a piece called All-Seeing Surveillance, which I think really does visualize this notion of a vortex, something that Eileen was just speaking to. It's also a work that you reconceptualized somewhat for Bowdoin with the addition of ladders. So maybe I'll turn it over to you now just to expand upon that a little bit. And as you're speaking, I may also bring in two pieces that you've described as being satellites of this. So I'll give it to you now.
So at the Bronx Museum, this was on top of a scaffold, but a lot of the works in this show are from 2022, and so I made them for the Bronx Museum show. So having the ability to re-envision them for another space or install them for the second time, I feel like I'm still learning what they are, learning what they mean. And so this time I knew that I wanted it on ladders instead of the scaffolding. And so the underlying shape is the shape of a UFO, like a flying saucer is what's the armature for this. And then the shaping of it is with chicken wire and with motor oil soaked newsprint that has charcoal and graphite powder on it. So kind of it ends up looking a little bit like a cloud. I think my original idea was thinking about like unseen witnesses or witnessing. I don't want to say maybe witnessing from the great beyond, but all different kinds of witnessing, like the stars being a witness, like the Methuselah star is 14 billion years old, or is older than the actual universe, right? It's the oldest star in the universe, and it predates the universe. But thinking about how there is always a kind of constant that something is seeing something, somewhere something is seeing something, and it doesn't matter if it's like dependent upon like thinking about the surveillance that we are under continuously, or just different types of ways of thinking about how you're seen or being seen, or from what vantage point, or who's the one who's doing the seeing.
Or being seen through, as you mentioned, through the lens of being love, of being comforted, rather than being surveilled.
Abigail, one of the things that I love about your use of ladders in this piece is the way in which it relates to the use of ladders in a piece entitled Ascension. And I'm going to leapfrog forward a moment into the center gallery, where you also, I think, suggest something about the very nature of construction, the presence of doors and windows that perhaps give us some sense of something perhaps that is being scattered, but at the same time, something that is cohering into a particular space and place. And I wondered if perhaps you could speak a little bit about this aesthetic of the construction of worlds that seems to move through your pieces, which I find incredibly fascinating.
Well, so a black hole is formed through a supernova, right? The star dies and then it implodes, and then all of these materials are redistributed and become other form, like throughout the universe, right? But I think that kind of cyclical pattern of creation through destruction as how we operate, like as human beings, right? It's how worlds are built, or how fictions are created, or histories, or nations. But I think in the context of the Bronx Museum, this was like as a strategy to also deal with all of the white walls in the gallery, because I hate white walls. But I was just like, okay, no, we can't have all this white. And so this is me making a painting, basically. So I just made a giant painting to cover up the white wall, but also to think about the beginning and ending of all things, right? Like the start of something is also the end of something. And then how does that live, like within our imaginations, or thinking about the frames that were constructed in which to contain us, right? And where are we in terms of like passing through these different kinds of windows, moments, passageways, right? And I use a lot of these materials I've sourced from multiple places, but I think a lot of this comes from a dump in Philadelphia, and some of that is like roofing plywood. So it's also thinking about like transitory nature of a particular kind of socioeconomical existence.
Abigail, would you want to say anything about the blue and orange? Because I think in a sense it ties back to Have Maine, which we opened with.
Yeah, so I use a lot of blue and orange in this show also because of the Dutch, that being represented. That's the New York State's flag colors. That's why all of the sports teams basically are those colors. But also it's, the Dutch flag's colors. So it's like the little vestiges that are left from New Amsterdam.
So, Abigail, I'm going to continue to leap forward, and I hope you will see the slides in this exhibition as a bit of a teaser and an invitation to come dive into the exhibition in person. A wonderful piece, Soul Sister, which I think is fascinating. This is a little remnant, if I'm not mistaken, Abigail, of Have Maine being repurposed. But and a beautiful piece, Lullaby, based upon, or inspired in part by a poem by Langston Hughes. Thank you for that. But speaking of creation, I wonder, Abigail, if we could ask you to speak a little bit about one of your most recent creations, a work that was developed for this exhibition, which seems in so many ways to pull together aspects of African-American yard work, to which Eileen was referring, this sense of the vortex. I was so intrigued by its visual similarities to All-Seeing Surveillance, but I think this is a piece that we would all love to hear more about the development of.
So thinking about, well, what could I make that could address this place or this space? And then looking through, I think initially during my residency here last spring, I was looking a lot at the original objects that were donated by James Bowdoin III and some things that belong to James Bowdoin II. That are part of the permanent collection. And so the Miracle of the Miser, and then also these funerary figures, these Egyptian figures, were two of the things that I landed on. And even though they feel very disparate, they're more of like thinking about, I think really like a question of morality, or like what is actually worth learning, or what are the actual things that are like in terms of thinking about a classical education, or this institution as it was envisioning itself in the 19th century, or like it's a bad turn of phrase, but birth of a new nation, right? And thinking about what that meant in this Enlightenment kind of period, and all of the contradictions that are embedded within that, but then also looking or scouring the world, or looking through what the world view was and that vantage point at that particular moment, that's something that was worthwhile to bring to, you know, Massachusetts / to be Maine, right? And things that were going to be valued and maybe cherished for, you know, for 1,000 more years situation. And so I asked for a scaffolding, which, shout out to Jose in the back, we made it happen in less than 24 hours, yes. So we got some scaffolding, and then I was like, yes, I want a scaffold. It's the Bowdoin scaffold, right? So in terms of like thinking about scaffolding within our mind, or the building of a structure, right? The foundational kind of, the architecture of what a higher education actually is, or what that looks like, or what taste making is, or what is the impetus behind the building of a collection. Then when it was installed, and the first time I saw it, I don't know if anybody was around, but I yelled in the gallery. I was like, yes, because, you know, like, then we got these diamond formations, which is also like that's like a symbol that is used a lot in yard work. I went to a plantation once, I think it's called Boone Hall Plantation in South Carolina, and that sign, it's called the All-Seeing Eye of God, actually, and so it's a reminder that God is watching. But I saw that like built in bricks, in a brick formation on the backs of slave houses that were for more skilled laborers. They were made out of brick, and field laborers were made out of like, you know, wood or whatever, and they were collapsible, so none of those really exist. But these brick ones are still standing, and that was embedded in the brick. There's an old Swede church, I think in Philadelphia, that was also a sign that was used in the Underground Railroad, that this diamond shape. And if you go to the church, right outside of the church, there are still glazed diamond shapes in front of the church. I think that church is also from like the 17th century, maybe 18th century. But so like this was like a known sign of maybe a place of safety, but it's also remembering that somebody's watching, right? Like somebody else is watching, somebody's recording it. And whether you believe in God or not, right? Like that time will avail, right? Like there is a measure somewhere at some point. There has to be a juncture of accountability. But so thinking, like looking at that through this, then there's the image of the NASA image of the solar eclipse that just happened on April 8th, right? So it's like, what can I throw into this? Like, how many different conversations could I possibly have? But then thinking about this miser's heart, right? Like, I think it comes from, you said it was the story of Saint Anthony.
Yeah, it's there's a parable of Saint Anthony, which interestingly enough was described by Donatello and then by Raphael, whose students then we believe copied his rendition of Donatello. So in terms of the passage of stories, the very way in which this image itself was created conjures some of that transmission. And this is a group reacting to the discovery that the miser does not have a heart in his bodily chest because his heart has migrated to his chest of gold. And so there is a suggestion that in concentrating exclusively upon the pursuit of riches, that individual had lost his humanity. And Abigail, when I look at this piece, which conjures up visions of distant worlds, perhaps we could say both the pursuit of knowledge, but maybe also the pursuit of other rewards. When I look at it, I think a little bit about the question of what are our aims in what we pursue, and to what degree will those influence our humanity going forward.
And I think this work is kind of a culmination or accumulation of a lot of the themes that you have talked about in terms of, the spirits. The bottles are stand-in for spirits, and then the reproduction of the solar eclipse and other references to space, which we'll see in a little bit in two large-scale pieces. But thinking about your interest in cosmology, in space, I can't help but think that back, space travel, thinking about like how it is in direct conversation with, you're thinking of cosmology, thinking about space travel. And so there was another piece that was shown on the screen. It was called Dark Matter, No Matter, where it's showing a dark-skinned figure upholding the head of a mannequin head of a white child, and thinking about that notion of how that labor is helping, all of that hard labor is helping, someone else and helping another group. And I remember that we were talking about your interest in space and in science fiction, and how I think you were referencing Gil Scott Heron's 1970 spoken word poem, Whitey's on the Moon, and thinking about how just before that, in 1969, the Apollo lunar capsule landed on the moon. And so, again, you're talking about these like inequities that exist and it's happening very much today. There's that same conversation where people are interested in space travel. There is the people going up to space for leisure, and yet there is so much inequities for marginalized communities that need to be taken care of right on Earth, right here on land.
Yeah, I think this is also like in the ways in which we expend all of this effort with like a profound lack of imagination. Like that if we if we are actually, like some other form of stardust, right? And those were the origins, and that's how we're going to end up, right? Then we're just like in these cyclical kinds of patterns of that also, like the same. This is like really off topic, but like thinking about like also the multiple materials that have been seen throughout this exhibition in terms of like the chicken wire, or going back to the miser's heart and all seeing surveillance, right? Like there's an astrophysicist, I'm dropping her name right now, where she talks about like the early formation of the universe with the gases that form look like chicken wire. Those were the formations. So thinking about that, this chicken wire is also like a nod to the early formation of the universe. It's a drawing of that in a way. And I think the thing that informed my thinking about this piece was like reading this book, an exhibition that the museum put on, I don't know if it was 1970 or something, about James Bowdoin. James Bowdoin II. And so in 1748, he had written a thesis or it wasn't called a thesis, a proposition for Harvard, which has not survived, but and the question was whether communicative justice may require equality between work and wages, which is like, what? He was already, like he was already inherited all of this wealth. He was already a capitalist, right? Like, it's also thinking about, okay, we're in a university, and when you're young, you're idealistic, and you have all of these thoughts and ideas, and you're questioning everything. And then at some point, something else happens, and maybe you're not really questioning things anymore, and you're not questioning the things that you're given, and maybe you think you're entitled to have the things that you have. You know what I mean? Like, there's a kind of wonder that maybe shifts into something else, and so then it's always trying to remember, how do you keep that wonder? How can you hold on to that, right? And I think there's something else about this that I wanted to say, but I don't remember right now. But that I'll be done with this. We can move on.
Abigail, I think I love what you're saying about the quality of wonder and the question of education. And as I mentioned earlier, we felt so fortunate to have you here a year ago as our artist in residence. And I did just want to acknowledge this beautiful group of prints that you created together with Colleen Kinsella, the studio technician over at Edwards, a very impressive printmaker herself. And I love this series of pieces that almost seem to evoke, to me, the landscape of a distant world. It's difficult to see in reproduction, but there is such a palpable sense of physicality about these prints, and I love the way in which they really seem to speak quite literally to the pressure of ideas exerted against perhaps the substance of history or human experience.
I mean, I was just playing around, so I don't have nothing really to say concrete about these. But, I mean, yeah, how do you make a drawing of the universe?
And you're using, like, different materials on the press, and can you talk, I guess, a little bit more about your process?
So these are monoprints, so you ink up a plexiglass plate, and you can, I think, go over it maybe like 2 or 3 times and add and subtract. And I think the one in the center, those white lines were made by rope that were put on the plate before it was run through the press. I don't remember the other ones necessarily.
Abigail, I love your question. How do you make a drawing of the universe? And that, I think, actually is a nice segue. I'm going to just hold off on saying anything about Black Monolith just at the moment, but I'll come back to it. But I think your question, how does one make a drawing of the universe, is a really beautiful transition to the final piece in the exhibition, inspired by your imagery of ascension. We have put it up on the upper level of our museum in the rotunda. And I love the fact that the architecture of our own building nods in some ways to the architecture of Azul, which encompasses the lunar capsule in a sense, with which we began this exhibition, allowing it to travel to various towns in Maine, and particularly Holton with the solar eclipse in April. And it was so much fun, Eileen and Abigail, to be in conversation with you at that time. But I wonder if perhaps you could speak to an artwork that I think in so many ways does encapsulate the wonder of the universe and creates a point of intersection between you and audiences who might like to experience that excitement.
Okay, I have to say, I'm like, I don't know how it's gonna get any better than this. In the rotunda, I'm just like, oh man, we could just stop now. Like, where else is this gonna go? And it's gonna look so good in a space. It's crazy. Like, I'm not over it. Also, because the Romans were obsessed with the Egyptians, right? Like, everybody's obsessed with the Egyptians, right? It's like first nation to really. First Nation, and one to really have like a stronghold on how to image power, like for thousands of years, right? Like people keep going back to that as the authority, as like the touchstone, right? And so, you go to Rome or you go to other places, like, they took a whole bunch of obelisks, right? And then they got their own fake obelisk going on, right? Like the United States, that obelisk that Washington Meyer is so ghetto. That's the ugliest obelisk, I think, on planet Earth. But anyway, and it's the United States. It gotta be bigger, it's better, right? How big is that obelisk? It's dumb, it's dumb. Okay, anyway, moving along. This is really like, oh, what's the heart of the matter, right? Like, what do we actually treasure? And I think that also is in conversation with the miser's heart situation, right? Like, the capsule is actually those openings inside of this pyramid, which is based very loosely on the step pyramid of Zoser, which is the oldest stone pyramid in Egypt. And that has 6 steps. This only has 4. And of course, that's like, I don't know how tall that is, maybe 200 meters or something. This is a little baby one. But this capsule can easily nestle inside of this thing, right? And so for me, what is at the heart of all of this is conversation, right? Like, I say this all the time, but that artists make art to have a conversation across civilizations, right? Across space and time, with the future and with the past and in the present. And so thinking about the things or the deposits that other viewers come and bring to this work, and the sharing and the recording of their stories and their voices that are left in the capsule. But for me, this really functions as a public artwork. So in the Bronx Museum version of this, it was the first thing in the lobby, and then the other story, so it's like flipped, and the family work was in the next gallery. And so the family work is first. And so really it's me telling the story through my family's material history in part, and then thinking about the viewer then being able to leave a deposit of themselves.
And then jumping off that, it's, what you said is, if you don't record your own stories and histories, like, who's going to do it for you? And so this is an opportunity for everyone to record their stories. And so when it was at the museum, we thought it was important to reach those audiences that don't necessarily come to the museum. And so we brought it out to different cultural events, different festivals, and different sites. And then similarly here in Maine, as you mentioned, it had traveled to, I think, 3 or 4 different communities, to be able to capture their stories and have them recorded.
Absolutely. And I'm sharing with you a couple of slides of the lunar capsule as it toured Maine. A wonderful young visitor, the first visitor to the lunar capsule on the left at Holton, Maine, the day before the solar eclipse. And then a friend and colleague of ours, Suzanne Bergeron, having fun recording her story in the lunar capsule when it was here at Bowdoin in May for the college's first ever powwow. And I have to say, Abigail, having been witness to audiences interacting with your piece at moments in time that felt very significant. I was so touched and moved by what I observed to be the power of your work to reinforce the significance of each person's experience of it, precisely because you created a space for people to record their stories. These stories are then made audible through the Black Monolith, which I lingered on a moment ago. But maybe I will just pause here, Abigail, and thank you from the bottom of my heart for creating space for people to tell their stories through your work. We hope that you will all take time to record your stories. And if you are willing, Eileen and Abigail, on that note, I'd love to open the floor to this audience to see what they might like to share. But thank you so much, Abigail, for everything you've given to our community. And although I'm not, thank you. It's good, thank you, Abigail, for sharing the mic. If you are able, we might ask, if you don't mind, that people take advantage of the mics in the aisles. It simply will allow your question to be recorded for posterity. And so I see Kathy Bradford making her way to a mic. Would you like to ask? We'll let Kathy have the first question. Would you like to ask the second? Wonderful, thank you. Kathy.
Thank you all so much for filling us in on all these great stories you've been telling. It's wonderful. I first saw Abigail DeVille when she was an undergraduate at FIT in New York City. I walked out of my classroom, and there was this art student crouched on the floor of the hall, surrounded by many sheets of paper and her stuff. I think it was the early universe drawings, maybe. I guess she was in a drawing class where they do give you a desk or an easel, but she had taken up the entire hall, all the way to the elevator. And she didn't really stop there. The next time I saw her, it was even more than the hall. You had to step around what she was doing. And FIT is not a progressive place. I'm sure they told her she could have 2 desks or 2 easels. And before she left the place, the entire lobby, which had a very high ceiling, was entirely filled with an installation she made. A fantastic, grand universe. I'm not making this up, right?
Yeah, that happened.
So my question to you, Abigail, is, did you have to go up to your teacher and say, "Excuse me, I really need space around me, a lot of space"? "Oh, well, you can move over to this corner." "No, I want to go out into the hall." Is that how it happened?
I don't remember asking anybody for anything.
Aha.
Yeah, I just did it. I was like on some trip where it wasn't working, so just make it bigger. Yeah, I did that for a really long time, but I think large was just like my natural inclination.
It was really an astounding moment for all of us on the faculty. Thank you.
Thank you.
What was the large-scale installation?
It were these paintings that I was making. That one of them was like, I don't know, 14 by 10 feet. There was one that was like 20 feet long. It didn't make any sense. I don't know what I was doing.
I just want to ask a question about steel materials. Speaking as a mathematician who loves objects, but I wonder if I could give me 5 seconds to express my appreciation. I walked into this gallery, into a gallery, half hour before the lecture, and I was just blown away with the eloquence of the voices that came out of your materials. So I was wondering if you could comment on how you gather these incredible volumes of material, because it would seem you need an entire crew to scour around and pull the materials into to work with your imagination. How does that happen? I mean, gradually, or you have it in your backyard?
Well, I think there's a lot of material. The only materials that I've ever committed myself to keeping were things that belonged to my grandmother. Mostly I just let it be like a stream that flows, and sometimes I pick something out, and sometimes I just let it pass on by, just so that I don't have to have the burden of enormous quantities of things that hold potential that I don't know when they're going to get the full activation of it. But usually I need like the structure of a prompt or a reason why to make something. I just can't make something because I want to feel like making something. I have to go through this whole process where I really question why, and I end up reading a lot of different kinds of materials, and so then at the very moment of then, oh yay, now we get to make something. Finally did all the prep work. Woo, okay, let's do it. I only select materials in a very short window of time. So maybe it's like within a week, or it's like a week. Maybe the longest I collected materials was maybe 3 weeks once in Los Angeles, but that's probably the longest period of time, just because there's so much material out here, it's endless. And I think the barometer or the system of measuring how I choose something is instinctive. Like usually I know when I touch something, is that it wants to be a part of a work, and I'll touch something and know that yes, and touch something else and say, no, I don't need that. And so that's, there's no way to explain that, but that's the process.
I was really surprised that the cigarette butts were collected while your grandmother was alive, because a lot of the material, you were sort of fortunate to be there in that week and to have that time to take all that material out and make the incredible things that you did. So I kind of assumed, I saw the show in the Bronx and, read the labels and et cetera. So I still hadn't realized that those cigarette butts were taken while she was alive. So that's pretty incredible. And I love the piece. But my question is about your grandmother. So you're referring to her, or the community referred to her as the archivist, and she's collecting all these materials, and they're all in the apartment. I was wondering if you could speak to, did she have any intentions for this materials that she was collecting? If you want to talk just a tiny bit about that.
I don't know how she thought about it. I don't know if she thought that she was taking care of them for someone. And like there was a tragedy that happened with a family in the building, and the last living family member gave my grandmother maybe 5 or 10 houseplants, because they were like leaving to go to Florida or something. And so my grandmother took care of the plants. You know what I mean? Like the plants then became her plants. And so like thinking about, actually there's like an unofficial recording of the history of the lives of the people of this building happening in this space. I don't know if she thought about it as being a good neighbor, or there's a living thing that I'm going to take care of, or this was worth something to somebody and that now it's important to me. I'm not sure how she thought about it.
Thank you so much. And why don't we have what will be our final question of the afternoon?
Thank you so much. Eileen, I want to thank you for bringing this brilliant, challenging show to Maine. I've been going to this museum for many, many years, and it's the first time the entire space is transformed into some other kind of being. It doesn't feel like a museum, it feels like some other kind of entity. So my question to you, Abigail, is were you influenced by Judy Pfaff growing up with your ability to transform a space from one thing alchemically into another?
I love Judy Pfaff, but that wasn't necessarily, like, she wasn't on my radar of people when I was like in undergrad. And I mean, the art I grew up with as a kid was like graffiti. And so maybe that's also maybe where the expansiveness comes from, right? Like thinking about like the subway cars going by the window in the 80s or whatever, and thinking about bombed out trains or something. I know that was the earliest exposures I had to seeing art, because my mom, for whatever reason, dragged us to the Museum of Natural History. Growing up in New York, I didn't go to an art museum until I was like 16. So I think that's where the expansiveness comes from. Yeah, that's all I can say about that.
We were neighbors growing up. I grew up on 181st Street, so we're kind of a kindred spirits there.
I love your observation about alchemical transformation, and I think that there's no more beautiful description actually of what Abigail's work does and evokes, and we feel so proud and fortunate, Eileen and Abigail, that you've given us an opportunity to transform our spaces thanks to your work, which I think even more importantly will transform the way in which we see the world. Thank you all for being with us this afternoon. I hope that you will join us to continue the conversation next door at the Art Museum. The doors are open, and we hope you can come join us in raising a glass and continuing to observe and take in this amazing exhibition. Thank you so much, and thank you, Eileen and Abigail.